Hello, everybody. I'm Phil Brandt, President and CEO of AIM Employers Association, and welcome to This Week at Work.
This Week at Work is the only show about the workplace that offers you front row seats and a microphone, featuring experts in human resources and employment law to bring you practical, timely, and accurate insights so you can more effectively lead your organization. It's Thursday, May 16th, episode 279 today. In 2024, the number one concern from the C-suite is retention, and retention hinges on one key factor: engagement. We bring in our engagement expert, Tanya Zion, as she introduces us to her 2024 retention strategy checklist. From data to conflict resolution, Tanya talks about what's driving good employees away and how through intentionality and consistency, culture can be reborn. Also, Burt offers an update to the non-compete ruling and workplace harassment guidance. All this and more on This Week at Work.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. It's good to be here. Burt, I got to tell you, we got all kinds of things to talk about. We have northern lights in the sky. I have cicada infestation at my house. We have Tanya Zion with us back as a guest with us today. We just came off the leadership conference. We have legal updates. What is it that you want to focus on, Burt?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Let me start with the with your leadership conference, and what a great opportunity to sit and talk with Craig Berube, the Blues Stanley Cup winning coach. He was an amazing guy. And I'll tell you, Phil, you and I both commented on this. I went to shake hands with that guy and my hand disappeared inside of his hand. I mean, those things have pummeled a lot of faces.
His fist, when we did one of these standing next to each other, and his hand, when he made a fist, it was like the size of like a grapefruit or something. It was huge. I just can't imagine, that. It was huge. Anyway,
it's so funny because his personality is just so mellow and honest and open, yet he was just this bruiser when he was a player.
Yeah, no, it definitely was. It was a great story. When he got into Q&A, that was really the best part for me, when people just asked him what was on his mind. Overall, a wonderful conference. Again, sold out, 540 people. Was just a fantastic day. And that's what brings Tanya with us today. She wasn't able to make the conference, but has some things we're going to chat about. But she's got some good things to talk about as it relates to culture. Before we get to that, let's kick off our poll questions. Did you attend last week's leadership conference? There's a few selections for you. Now, I would think that's just yes or no. But Nick actually gives you 4 different responses, possible responses for that. So thanks for being there, clever Nick. And then I
hope nobody selects answer 4.
Yeah. No,
or answer 2.
Let's hope not, but I do recognize. I mean, let's keep in mind this is a national program and people watch it all over the U.S. Sure. So not everyone made their way across the country, although we did have many travelers in for the conference. And then which we have, if you did, which breakout topic would you like the show to focus on during a future episode? So we had the 12 lessons in leadership. Preserving success during periods of high growth, how to pivot and thrive in any situation, simple leadership communications. When we do simple and communications, I don't know, that just doesn't ever seem to work in my life. Strategic team mapping for leaders, key compensation issues, understanding your team's genius, adapt in an ever-changing world, and the last one is develop leaders to create engagement and fulfillment. I mean, those are really some great leadership topics. So we'd like to know if you're interested in hearing about any of those in future podcast episodes, and we'll try and line that up for you.
Phil, yeah, on that third to last one there, understanding your team's genius. I mean, maybe you can just comment on that, since you are frequently the genius of any team. What's that like for you?
I don't know if it's genius or mad scientist, right?
Okay.
I might be more like the scientist from Back to the Future versus genius, Burt. Okay,
Maybe
so
they're talking about the genius of the team itself, as opposed to one individual on the team, such as yourself, who might be a genius.
I was going to say, Burt, Phil's genius is hiring good people around him. I mean, we're examples of that, right? I mean, that's
clear. Tanya, this is why I love having you on the program. That is exactly what it is. And anyone that works with me knows that is so true. All right, so let's get on to lawyer on the clock. Are you ready for that, Burt?
I'm ready, Phil.
Okay, Nick, pull that lever.
All right, it's time to look into what's trending in employment law. Lawyer, you're on the clock.
So we've got two today that are in the category of completely not a surprise. And then Phil, I'm going to try to throw a little curveball at you for the third topic that I want to talk about.
Remember, I'm
today.
a genius now, Burt. So
all right, very good, very good.
Curveball.
All right, so the first one is going to be in the category of not a surprise, is that the United States Chamber of Commerce in the last few days has asked a Texas federal court to issue an injunction stopping the Federal Trade Commission's new non-compete rule from going into effect while the litigation challenging that ban plays out. And basically, they're arguing that the rules enforcement would irreparably harm businesses and their employees. So you'll remember that the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, passed a new rule in the last few weeks that basically says come September, virtually all existing non-compete agreements will instantly become unenforceable. The Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, has said that non-compete agreements can be mutually beneficial because they allow companies to protect their confidential information and employees to obtain specialized training and the potential for greater compensation. So again, just in the last few days, last Friday, as a matter of fact, the Chamber and fellow plaintiff interveners, the Business Roundtable, the Texas Association of Business, and Longview Chamber of Commerce sought to stay the rule's effective date, basically looking for a preliminary injunction. And
now, that's not just for employers in Texas.
Correct.
On behalf of the U.S., yeah.
Yep, they're looking to ban this nationwide, and the suit by the chamber and these other business groups, in essence, claims that the Federal Trade Commission lacked authority to issue regulations barring what the agency believes are unfair methods of competition, and they've argued that Congress never gave the FTC general rulemaking authority and instead limited the Commission's authority to writing regulations in specific contexts. The complaint also targets the rule's retroactive reach and argues that a categorical ban reflects, quote, an arbitrary and capricious exercise of agency powers.
You guys use those great words all the time, capricious. No one uses that in everyday conversation, but great stuff there. Keep going, Burt. I'm sorry.
The next one, that's all right, Phil. The next one, again, in completely not a surprise, is that a coalition of 18 state attorneys general have now sued to block the enforcement of the EEOC's new workplace harassment guidance, claiming it illegally broadens the scope of a federal anti-discrimination law's gender identity protections. So you all recall, of course, that just in the last couple of weeks, the U.S. EEOC finalized their sweeping guidelines on harassment in the workplace. They finalized those on April 29th. And basically, what the court is arguing here, or what the plaintiffs are arguing here, is that the Administrative Procedures Act, under that act, the EEOC made what's called an end run around their constitutional institutions, Congress, of course, by misusing its authority to eliminate women's private spaces and pushing the use of biologically accurate pronouns at the expense of the state's employers. And so there is plenty, there's a lot of litigation on this. They're also asserting that the guidance conflicts with laws enacted by the plaintiff states, including those that require sex segregated facilities in certain workplaces like public schools. You'll recall the EEOC's guidance holds that repeated and intentional use of a name or pronoun inconsistent with an individual's known gender identity or denial of an employee's ability to use a bathroom or sex-segregated facility consistent with their gender would trigger sex-based harassment claims under Title VII. So that's why these states are suing, so that people don't get in trouble if they use an individual's birth pronouns, despite the fact that the individual wants to be called by different pronouns, and also related to the bathroom. So again, not a surprise that these suits have been filed. And of course, I'll keep you posted on the program here as to what takes place.
Well, those will be two to keep good eyes on. So
Yes.
I'm glad you're keeping a watchful eye for us all, Burt. We'll stay tuned for more.
All right.
So anything else on your agenda today?
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to throw at you, Phil, is just kind of a reminder to employers out there that not all hostile work environments are Title VII violations or ADA or ADEA violations. That basically the courts have said here that the laws do not protect a person from everyday indignities and annoyances of working in an office, and they do not entitle a person to a job opportunity if the person is not the most qualified candidate by far. So why am I chatting about this? Because I found this case to be a little bit interesting. We've got a plaintiff in a case here. This case is on appeal. The defendants in the case, which was the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, won a case against a chemist who brought a discrimination and hostile work environment and retaliation claim. And what the Department of Health and Human Services is arguing in this case is that Grinch, get this, Grinch is not a protected class, and federal law does not protect an individual from not being well liked in the workplace. So I bet you didn't know that, Phil. That
start over. Say this again. Grinch, like the Grinch who stole Christmas?
Exactly. That is not a protected class, Phil.
Ah, really? Oh,
yes.
I'm going to have to change our handbook here at AIM. I tell you, we got Grinch written down. You might be surprised. Sometimes people think I might be a Grinch. But yeah, so we can be Grinches all day long.
But that's not protected.
We have no protection.
So, yeah. So basically in this case, the plaintiff accused his employer of giving him negative performance evaluations, removed him from management decisions, significantly reduced his direct reports, changed his position description, imposed what he felt was untenable deadlines, and refused to select him for a position for which he claimed he was the most qualified. And then in one instance in December 2019, a supervisor loudly stated to some other colleagues, "There's the Grinch himself." And so he filed a lawsuit claiming that was part of the discrimination and hostile work environment he suffered. And they like I said, the Department of Health and Human Services won at the trial court level. This individual's trying to have his claim revived at the Fourth Circuit. And that particular comment about the Grinch was made the week before Christmas while the plaintiff walked into an office adorned with Grinch-themed decor.
That's awesome.
Yes.
So, okay, the Grinch is not a protected class, but what about a who?
What about a who? That's a good question, Phil. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But who
so
might
we'll
be
have
protected?
to see what the ruling is and where the line gets crossed on protected class. All right. So
quit it and eat your green eggs and ham.
Good stuff. The Grinch. I mean, what is the world coming to, right? He just needs to listen to the end of the program and say, "Let's go out and be good to somebody." It's that easy. We don't have to be Grinches. All right. Anything else, Burt?
I think that's probably good enough for today, Phil.
All right. Fantastic. There you heard it. The fastest 6 minutes on the clock. Thanks, Burt. We appreciate that. Tanya, good morning and welcome to the program today. We did miss you last week.
I missed being there for sure. So good morning and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So last week you were going to talk about the engagement checklist. Is that correct? Tell us a little bit about what were some of the items you were going to chat about, and let's pick one and do a little bit of a deep dive.
Yeah, absolutely. So the engagement checklist was really related to retention, right? You've heard me say this now for 2 years. Leaders are worried about retention and recruitment. And my plea to everyone is if you want to solve retention and recruitment, focus on engagement. So that's the first thing. Understand what retention drivers really are. It comes down to engagement. And I was going to encourage everyone to focus on data, right? So often I think it's really easy for us to say, well, I feel this way, or I think this is going on. And so let's get some data around that and have good tools to be able to gather the data. And also, and I keep bringing this up because I'm hearing it day in and day out, we're not doing conflict well in the workplace. And it really is driving people away. But
we're calling people Grinches.
Well,
I mean, that's not
know.
part of the training programs you would go through at AIM. If for conflict resolution, we don't go Grinch. I mean, we have opinions about Burt all the time, but we don't always share them openly with him.
Being a Grinch is probably not the best retention strategy.
Yeah.
Probably not. I think we all have to kind of do some self-reflection and own how we want to show up in the world. That's just the best way to improve life overall. Is this really how I want to show up in this moment? But that kind of leads to culture. Like, what do we allow people to do? And I have to say, when Burt was telling the story, it was a chemist. So I was like, wait, was it the Rogaine factory gone wrong? And now it's this green man and he truly, I didn't know where that was going, Burt. So, but yeah.
No, that guy became the Joker.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But so really what I think we're going to focus on today is really how all these things come together in its culture, right? And that's really what I'm trying to get everyone to understand. Look, I am an Oregon Trail baby, right? I'm a Gen Xer through and through. And when I was in high school and college, my job was to go around, I was a temp worker. So I filled in for all the reception and positions. And I'd sit down at the reception desk and time again, across from me would be this gold lettering on the wall. This is our mission and these are our values. And it always struck me as funny because it was meaningless, right? It was great words. They had paid companies a lot of money, but when I felt how it felt in those organizations, they weren't living by their values. And that's so much of what drives culture. So yeah, I think that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So to me, that's the one that really drives much conversation when I'm sitting with the CEO. And I sometimes even don't like to use the word culture. Tim, who runs our marketing department, he's always wanting to throw that in there, and I get it. But for me, I struggle with it to talk about culture because it's used in such a way that I'm not sure we really understand what we mean when we say culture, right? It's people will say, well, we have a nice culture. We have ice cream and we do hot dogs, or we have pizza parties, or we celebrate birthdays. And I guess in some sense that is part of culture. That's part of who you are and how you do some things. But that doesn't mean you have a good culture. That doesn't mean you have a healthy culture. Those same organizations, when that's their focus, they're not necessarily achieving retention, which we know from our survey is the number one concern from the C-suite for 2024 is retention. So tell us, when you think about culture and you're talking about it in your presentation there, let's dive a little deeper there.
Yeah. So let's start to wrap some definition around it, because culture really is those behaviors and beliefs that are exhibited. And I think that's the key thing in it. We can define it all we want, but if it hasn't made its way throughout the organization in both stated ways and unstated ways, right? If I'm meeting with my manager and I'm getting feedback, I want to know how my behaviors support or don't support the stated values and culture of the organization. So we need to be talking about it. And through that, if we actually make it part of our culture, we develop these prevailing values and norms. And it's not just in the way that people act, it's also the systems we have within our organizations. It's how we make decisions, and that should prevail throughout everything. And so, I think leadership has a responsibility of defining that, of setting the example. And then we have to work to make sure that employees are living by those values and standards so that they start behaving the way that we want them to. And the reason we're talking about this so often right now is, the Grinch is a great example, right? People think they can just show up and I can show up however I want. And you just have to accept that. And I don't think that we have to do that in the workplace. Everyone can have space to be who they they are, but show up in a way that supports the values and the environment that we're trying to create. And whether you are intentional about this or whether you are not intentional, it's deeply embedded in your organization. And so if you've let this be a void, everyone's behaving in a way and creating a culture. And so my encouragement to everyone is that you can change your culture, but it takes a lot of intentionality and it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah. In fact, some of our speakers at our conference were focused on how they intentionally changed it. And some of the messages were very interesting, right? So you talk about, okay, well, Phil's talent is maybe hiring good people. That's my own genius. And I would agree with that. And good people do good things, but we don't go around and call each other Grinch. And you'll talk a little bit about psychological safety. Often I'll hear you. That doesn't mean you have the ability to come in and be inappropriate at work, or to be mean, or to be the Grinch at work. And I think what you're really talking about is companies will have values, and they'll be posted, they'll be in their handbook, they'll be on the wall. They do all kinds of things to promote their values visually.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily then put those values into practice. And I think that's what I'm hearing you say is, how do we put those values into practice? Do you have any examples of how that can look for someone? You know, like they'll have trust as a value. They'll have open communication as a value. Some of them aren't, you know, that genius in and of themselves in the language, but they're very, very important. And I'm not minimizing the importance of saying trust or open communication. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think values express, like when we're in an individual, the only way that you know what my values are is through my behavior, right? If I say that I have high integrity, do I show up on time? Do I, admit mistakes? Do I communicate? Those things, you can see that through the behavior. When we think about organization values, they're really reflected through systems and processes. And what I mean by that is, so let's say that we have a value that we want to be innovative. And then I pull your budget out and I look at your technology spend, and there's no budget for technology spend. Well, how are you going to be an innovative company, right? And employees see through that. If we say that we want to, trust is a great one, right? We say we want to have trust in our employees. And yet our policies are, if you're 1 minute late, you get written up and you have points deducted. How is that fostering a sense of trust, right? So we need to talk about that thing. And the way we would have that conversation, gosh, Burt, you had no idea we were going to use the Grinch example through this whole thing, right? But Grinch shows up to
Oh my
work.
goodness. Oh my gosh, look at that.
Yeah, there's the Grinch. There he is.
Way to go, Nick. I love it. But if I'm the person who is calling that person a Grinch or the Grinch, as a manager, I can use and leverage values to talk about this, right? Like we want to foster a community of respect, right? That's one of our stated corporate values. So Grinch, what I noticed in your behavior is your communication style tends to be abrupt. You don't often focus conversations in a way that are difficult, that we come to positive outcomes. I really want you to be successful in our organization. I think you have the right things to do that. And so I want to bring you in alignment with our respect value. What tools do you need? Do you think going to some sort of training around conflict would be helpful for you? Is there something going on at home that maybe I just need to be aware of? Do you have too much on your plate? So we can talk about those values. And then on the flip side, that manager or whoever walked in and said, oh, there's the Grinch, same conversation. It is important in our culture that we have a value of respect that we're fostering. And I noticed that you're frustrated, right? And it came out name calling. That doesn't seem to foster what we're trying to really develop here. So how can we bring you in alignment? What frustrations are you having that we can solve those rather than taking a short track to name calling? That's how values work in the corporate environment.
One of our speakers, and I forget which one it was definitely one of the keynote speakers that we had, mentioned one way that they project their values through their culture is that once a week, in their meeting, they start the meeting and everyone has to bring an example or a couple of examples of innovation to the meeting from that week.
Yep.
And, innovation is a value to them. It was obviously very important to their business model, but that's an example of the very top of the organization, having a structure that brings the value to life versus saying, we're an innovative organization. We value innovation, but they don't have any forum in which it's ever discussed or brought forward. And I thought that was a good example because we see that the likeness for that for me is, Nick, what are you doing to me here? All right. I got a few names in mind for you, Nick, but I'm not going to do those because I value you.
Phil, I know you've been working out a lot, but that's quite a shape you've developed there.
Look at the shoulders there. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, the likeness of that, and Chibs would be happy if we brought it up, is, when someone wants to bring up, we start every meeting with a safety topic.
Yep.
Right. That's an example where your value is safety. We care for people. So we start a meeting with safety. Well, what are the other values that you have and where and how do they get projected into your business model? And that's the example I often will refer to is safety. Great. Okay. You start every meeting. Where and how do you do that for trust or communication or whatever the values are, innovation, from that standpoint?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It has to start at the top. And what I love about talking about culture and values is that's really where we connect into engagement, right? Because engagement really is that emotional and intellectual commitment to the individual group that we're a part of, right? And so if I walk in and I'm like, well, we say we value safety, but there's water on the floor, I don't have the tools I need, I don't have the safety equipment I need, then I don't feel connected to that in any way, right? And so now it's just words. Where if we start with, hey, we don't start any meeting until we have a safety tip, then now I'm like, okay, I can share that. I can plug into that and I can show these things. And so that to me is engagement. We have to say this is who we are, right? Through our culture. We have to use our values to shape our behaviors, our processes, and our systems. And when we get that right, employees have a very clear picture of how they can engage in the workplace. We get that wrong, or we're not intentional about it, then employees will fill the void. And they'll do it through actions that we don't want them to do. They will do it through behaviors and just attitudes. And so time and time again, what I'm trying to explain to people is engagement isn't expensive. It's just intentional. And a lot of times it's very simple things that we can do. And I think the basis for all of it is know who you are and do that through your values.
Another one of the speakers also talked about how their employees help define the method in which they will celebrate or display their values, right? And that's a big thing for leaders to let go of and or to trust. But the process alone projects often many of the values companies are trying to promote, right? The fact that if we say trust is a value, and now I have a group of people from our facility who are going to help us define how we live out our values at work, that's an example of displaying trust and living with that. And then the hard part for leaders is to accept that. And one thing that the leader said when he was speaking, he said, I didn't change anything at all about what they brought forward. And he said, what would it have said if I asked them to do it and then they brought it to me and I said, yeah, I like it, but I'm going to change this. And, that kind of resonated with me in the sense that you have to trust the process. You have to trust that this is the interpretation from the organization. As long as it's not fundamentally wrong, then you have to go with it. Any examples? I know you work with members all the time in doing that. And I think that was Rich Gund from the Gund Company that talked about that. But is there anything that you've experienced with any members and examples like that to maybe give us some confidence?
Absolutely. We had a member who was really going in crisis. Leadership changed over, really toxic culture, and did an engagement survey, got some data that we needed to look at, knew where we needed to go in. And trust was a major issue in the organization. Employees didn't trust what was being said. There hadn't been good follow-up. So we did a 2-hour workshop. It was 2 hours. This is how easy this can be. We got all the employees in the room. It was a smaller employee, about 50 employees. And we said, here are posters around the room, divide up in groups. And what I want you to do is I want you to talk about the value of the organization. What do you do for your customers? We wrote all those words down. We got them back on posters and we said, what are the value of your job? Like, what do you bring here? What is it that you're actually doing? And so we got to just a number of words. We went and, eliminated the duplicates. This was all like freehand. And then what we said is, okay, we agree on, say, these 10 words. Now go back to the posters and tell me how that's demonstrated. Give me examples, behaviors, and actions that we do that. And in a matter of 2 hours, we had narrowed that down to about 6 values that everyone agreed on. And then they formed a culture committee. That culture committee went and wordsmithed those 6 values. And when I came back 3 weeks later, we had values for the organization. Now, for employees that felt like they didn't have trust, that they didn't have meaningfulness and connection in the workplace, how do you think those employees feel now? They just wrote the company values. So now,
and they wouldn't have felt that way should the leader then said, oh, I like that, but I'm going to change these things. That's right.
And they didn't. They gave the employees, and then the leadership then got on board with it and said, hey, this is how we're going to incorporate it. So that to me is a really powerful example of not a lot of effort, not a lot of spend. And now when we had almost in the focus groups, 60% of the employees saying, hey, I'm ready. I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. They've had 100% retention among those groups, and nobody left that way.
That's amazing stuff.
That is a great story. Yeah, that's a great story. And that cost them 2 hours of time. All right. We're going to have to wrap it up. Tanya, thank you so much for joining us again. Burt, I don't know that if you and Nick set me up for this topic of the Grinch, it all seemed very prepared. So I'm not quite sure what happened there, but what are we doing? We're still making fun of me. I can see this here. Hey, Nick, there we go. There we go. Look at that. Burt, I'm going to give you a pop quiz, Burt, real quick. Do you remember the name of the dog from the Grinch?
You've stumped me, Phil. What was the dog's name?
It was Max.
Max,
the name of the dog was Max. We're going to go out and practice a little Cindy Lou Who, and we'll be back here next Thursday, same time, 7:30 Central. Bye-bye.
Thank you once again for tuning into This Week at Work. If you enjoy the show, please share it with your colleagues. Forward our invites. Share the link, aimea.org/This Week at Work, or follow or subscribe wherever you get your news and entertainment. LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, we're everywhere you are. Don't forget you can be part of the show. Send your questions and comments anytime to info@thisweek.work. We'll see you next week, 7:30 a.m. Central Time, when we discuss what's happening this week at work.